All right, here's the deal. I already did my Path of Exile 2 review, and I figured after I was done with that, I'd be moving on to just play some other things. There's lots of games I like, lots of things I want to invest my time in, but nope. That's not what happened. In fact, I've not managed to pull myself away from this game at all for the past 4 weeks. Many mornings, I've been waking up as early as 4 a.m. to play like a total psychopath. I don't know what to say. This game is just very good, and it's got its hooks firmly implanted in me. It feels exceptionally good to play, both of the classes I've tried thus far, starting with the Infernalist Witch, and then most recently swapping over to level and play a Gemling Legionnaire. The moment-to-moment action, clicking on things, and blowing them up, it all feels fantastic. That coupled with the dopamine triggering RNG effects of loot drops has made for a highly addictive gameplay loop because hey, you're just one more rare pack away from that next divine dropping, right? Right? I mean, it's clear PoE 2 is very much one of those just one more run kind of games, or more specifically, just one more map in this instance. And all of the above results in time just melting away to a scary degree, frankly. I mean, 8 hours can just vanish just like that. I knew I was in deep when I got to the point where I was watching YouTube videos going over the most efficient currency farming methods. At that point, yeah, you know I'm a lost cause, right? But hey, I really don't need to gas this game up any more than it's already been. I'm sure you've seen plenty of other videos doing just that over this past month or so. And yeah, it's for good reason. So I guess here's just like one more data point to add to that long list of people saying Path of Exile 2 already, even in its early access unfinished state, is a very good and highly addictive game. Well, just yesterday, the folks over at GGG announced that they had returned back from the holiday break and are already planning some updates that will be rolling out soon. And now that I have well over 200 hours clocked over the course of this past 4 weeks, I wanted to go over some of the more glaring pain points that remain, or in some cases have gotten even worse, surfacing after launch, with the hope that now that GGG is back to work, that they will address some of these sooner rather than later. All right, so let's jump right into it. The first issue isn't really likely a universal problem, but it is scary enough that I hope GGG at least comes out and addresses it. And I'm talking about all of the hacking that is seemingly taking place. Now, it's hard to know exactly how widespread of an issue this is, but it is apparently happening often enough that I am seeing new threads and videos popping up almost daily. And if you've got no clue what I'm talking about, there are countless reports of players having their accounts hacked with their currency and valuable gear all being stolen. In most instances that I've seen, these have been players who had a lot of valuables to be taken, many hundreds of divine orbs in some instances, and gear that's worth nearly, if not just as much. Now, how are these players being targeted? Well, one common similarity appears to be that they are all taking part in the trading of some extremely high-end items, either buying or selling pieces of gear that are worth 30, 40, 50 or more divines each. Then, sometime after that, they wake up, they log into their account, and they find it has been hacked and pretty much everything of value has been taken. Now, in most cases of people being, quote, hacked in video games, it usually boils down to something as simple of poor password management, where people are using the same email and password for a ton of different accounts, and then one of those accounts gets compromised, then people go around with that email and password combo trying to use it on various services, and a lot of times they find themselves successful. Now, I have seen one theory, though, that the simple act of trading with other players and inviting a player into your party and then having them go to your hideout might be opening up some vulnerability where they get access to some sensitive details that then allows them to take stuff from your account. I suppose that's possible. I've not heard of this before in other games, but I wouldn't rule it out either. I also don't know enough about vulnerabilities in software to know if this is an issue that can happen. I will add, too, another possibility is that some of these players who have these accounts that are loaded with valuable currency could have been taking part in a little bit of RMT, spending real money to buy divines directly from networks who run bots, and then in the process, unfortunately, opening themselves up to being targeted and hacked by those very same RMT sellers. Now, I don't think we will ever know one way or another if this is the case, if that's exactly what is happening, because I doubt any of these players who have been hacked would admit to using RMT sites if they had in fact been using them. And I'm not looking to like throw around any accusations here. I'm just saying it is one possibility. I'll tell you personally, many, many years ago when I was a young lad, I dabbled in RMT a bit for a game or two. And let me tell you, in every instance of those, the process of going through that was incredibly shady, like shady as hell. And it's quite clear to me now, looking back on it, that engaging in RMT and dealing with these sites and going through that process may very well have opened me up to being hacked in those games as well. In fact, I'm pretty sure in one of the games that I had done RMT with when I was like 18 years old, I'm pretty sure they requested my account login info as part of the process. So again, I'm just tossing it out there as one of the possible reasons that this hacking could be taking place. Either way, though, as of right now, we don't know exactly where the vulnerability is that is resulting in all of this hacking that's taking place. We just know it is happening, and for the sake of the community, I hope GGG figures out why it's happening and they address this publicly so that we can all figure out why are accounts getting hacked and many hundreds of divines and valuable gear being stolen from these players. What is the issue that's leading to this, and what are they doing to address it? Okay, so with that out of the way, now let's talk about some of the gameplay and systems related issues that we're having. Towers. At first, I thought these were quite cool, fighting your way through these rooms of enemies before you find the stairs, and then climbing those to the top, activating the tower, and revealing the surrounding area. That was fun initially. After about 100, 200 of these, though, it's just become very tedious. They are identical every single time, but probably what's worse is that they are not nearly as rewarding as just running regular maps, since they can't spawn events like Expedition, Breach, or Delirium. And because that's the case, it wasn't long before I started just throwing in my lowest tier waystones so that I basically could sprint through to the end and get it done as soon as possible. I will also add too, like from an immersion standpoint, I find it a tad odd that these towers are always set in the jungle, even if you're currently in a non-jungle biome. It would be neat if they just like could adjust the backdrop to, instead of always being these palm trees, to matching whatever biome the tower was located in. Like, speaking of immersion as well, can someone please explain to me why we cannot place our precursor tablets directly into the tower once we've activated? I mean, there is literally a spot right there. After you click on the tower, there is a spot that is clearly designed for the precursors to go in, and they've got other systems in the game, like in Act 2, the buff that you select in the Valley of the Giants, or the final boss room in the Trial of Chaos to open the door where you put those 3 little slots in. You take items from your inventory and place it into a slottable object in game, and I just like, I get to the end of the tower, I click on the tower, and then I see that rectangle that I'm like, clearly I should be able to put my precursor tablet right here. Why is the game not letting me do it? That's just like an immersion sort of thing that nice little adjustment that I think they can make. But anyways, beyond the immersion stuff, the truth is towers have just become tedious. They feel like a chore. So anything that they could do to address that would be welcome. All right, now let's talk about mapping. I actually really enjoy mapping. You'd hope so, considering that this is what I've spent 95% of my playtime doing, clocked in well over 200 hours now. Going in, clearing packs of enemies, doing the league mechanics, fighting bosses, dealing with the waystone modifiers, and then collecting the loot. All of that, generally speaking, really enjoyable. What I probably like least right now about mapping is the entire setting up process required for you to get the most out of your maps and not feel like you're wasting your time. Essentially, your goal here is to get your map to the highest possible level, as that in turn means higher level enemies and potentially better loot. So basically, you're going to be looking for map nodes that are, for starters, corrupted, and then you want to irradiate them from a nearby tower, giving them a second +1 level. And then from another tower, you want to add whatever your preferred league mechanic is, be it Breach, Delirium, Ritual, or Expedition. But for the most part right now, it seems like almost everyone is universally in agreement that Breach is the best choice, as it looks to spawn the highest density of enemies, the highest number of rare packs, and as such it yields the highest potential to get a lot of loot and a lot of currency. So sometimes you'll be going around and you'll find a map node that is both corrupted and say already has Breach on it, or whatever, or boss, or multiple, right? Ideally you'll have multiple league mechanics, Breach, boss, Expedition, whatever. And now at that point, what you need to do is you need to locate a nearby tower and then irradiate that node. But the issue is you have no direct control over which nodes get hit when you place the precursor tablet into a tower. It'll be somewhere between 5 and 10, depending on your precursor tablet. And then that number is randomly selected from the available nodes within the radius of the tower. But the thing is that there are methods for you to basically guarantee TNT placement. It's simply a matter of clearing, or more specifically, attempting nodes that you don't want to hit with the precursor. So what this results in is you are spending a lot of time moving through the map when you see good nodes that are both, say, corrupted and have your desired boss map mechanics on them. You actually don't go there right away. Instead, what you first do is you go all around those ideal nodes, clearing the ones that aren't ideal, that don't have mechanics or that aren't corrupted. And you basically want to get all of those garbage nodes out of the way first, because when you do, it makes it so that they are no longer a potential target when you put the precursor tablet into the tower. So they won't take up the 5 to 10 irradiated nodes that you get at random when you place it in a tower. Now, I did recently learn you don't actually have to complete all of those undesirable nodes as long as you attempt them by placing a waystone in and then moving on to another one. To move through a node, you need to complete it, but sometimes you can get to a node spot and there'll be multiple connected ones in directions that you don't want to move but are still within your tower's radius. So you throw a map in there, you let the portals open, and then you go back to the control thing, you pick on another node, you throw another map in there, you open, and as long as a node is, quote, attempted in that fashion, it is then disqualified from being one of the nodes that gets hit from your precursor tablet, whether that's an irradiation, a breach, or whatever else you're putting in there. But even with that being the case, I just wish we could move from one node to another node in good conscience without it being the case that there are, quote, bad nodes that basically feel like a waste of time because they don't have any chance at dropping the highest tier items if they aren't corrupted, if they aren't irradiated, and if they don't have breach on them and or boss on them, basically. But this like grinding efficiency concerns aside, there are some other pressing issues with mapping, like just how overly punishing death is. As it stands in this game, once you're in endgame, dying already sets you back quite substantially. Every single death results in a 10% loss of your earned experience at that level. So if you're 50% of the way into level 90 towards level 91 and you die, it knocks you back 10% down to 40% of the way. Die 4 more times, you're all the way back to 0. Now you can't D-level, you can't go from 90 to 89, but anytime you die, you're losing 10% of your level. And the further you go into leveling, the more impactful this becomes. When you're levels 94, 95, 96 plus, you are eventually losing like hours worth of experience for every single death that you have. So already death is a pretty major setback when you're in Path of Exile 2's endgame. So I'm not sure then why they decided to make it even more significantly punishing with the fact that dying while mapping also causes you to lose any mechanics you had on the map. You're going to lose the +1 levels from any corruption or radiation. Those will be gone. And you're also going to lose any events. If a map had a boss, if it had any league mechanics like breach or delirium, those are going to be gone as well. Yeah, I mean, dying is already severely punishing. Again, you reach those later levels, the mid 90s and above, every death causes you to lose hours worth of experience that you were grinding. So them nuking all of the beneficial enhancements to these map nodes on top of it, it just feels a bit excessive. A couple of other things I've noticed as pain points while mapping, the backtracking for elites. So you're going to go through a map, you're going to clear a bunch of enemies, eventually you'll get the enemy count low enough that it shows you where the elites are, and sometimes it just so happens that those elites are in the small little section of the map that you missed all the way back at the beginning, and so you got to spend like 5 minutes walking all the way back through an empty map to get to the one elite left for you to finish the map, for you to let you to progress to the next node. I don't know how they can address this, but it's extremely annoying as it is right now. Also, this has happened to me on numerous occasions, getting trapped inside of the boss arenas. So what occurs is you get a map that has a boss. You find the boss room, you walk in, you fight the boss, but sometimes they've got like an instance load in where you have to click in and load into the boss arena like separate from the non-loaded rest of the map. But what'll happen occasionally is I'll just walk into the boss room and there won't be that instance load in for you to click into. And then I fight the boss and I try to leave the boss room, but it's blocked off because then all of a sudden the click through load into the boss arena appears, but I can't get on the other side of it. Now there's like workarounds for this. If you invite people to your party and then have them join your map and then teleport to them. I don't have a lot of friends who are playing the game anymore. So I just don't have that as a possibility. So it's gotten to the point where this has happened often enough that any map that has a boss on it, I will save the boss until I've already cleared all the other rare packs. So if I do get locked in the boss arena, at least I'm done with the map, and then I can just port out and leave, and we're all set. But yeah, this is very annoying, and it's happened quite often to me. Now, like I said, though, I do just generally really enjoy mapping. I've spent a lot of time doing it, but I've also spent most of my time playing one of the more durable builds in the game currently, and that is a minion infernalist stacking energy shield with Grim Feast. On my character, I've gotten up to like 15,000 energy shield at this point, fully resist capped, and my minions are on the front line doing most of the work, so I rarely die on my infernalist, at least. It's not quite the same on my Gemling Legionnaire. I don't have it fully kitted out yet, but yes, on my infernalist, where I've spent most of my playtime, I rarely ever die, so maybe that is part of the reason why I am seemingly enjoying the process of mapping more than others, because if I was dying more frequently, for all of the reasons I mentioned, I would probably be far more annoyed. And before we move on from mapping, I'd like to add one more immersion related request. I think it'd be a lot of fun if they made it so that moving from map to map functioned just like the campaign, with an entrance and exit points as you go from one map to the next. So you go through, you clear a map, but instead of always having to port back to your hideout, if there was just an exit point, like how the campaign maps have exit points that lead you into other nodes, if the mapping had exit points that lead you into other nodes, so that I could seamlessly move from one map to another map to another map to another map, instead of always having to port back to my hideout and reopen those 6 portals. If they could make that more seamless integration, again, just sort of like an immersion request, sort of like the towers always being in the jungle, I think it'd be cool if mapping could just be more fluid from one to another, instead of, again, the back and forth of always going back to your hideout. But in my overall list of requests or hopes and changes that I'd like them to do, that's pretty near the bottom. It's just one of those, like, I just think it'd be I think it'd be a nice inclusion. All right, let's talk about sockets. Just flat out not being able to replace sockets has made the entire gearing process very awkward for me. Pretty much every single time I find or trade for a new piece of gear that's a good upgrade for my character's defenses or for my offensive stats, I actually can rarely ever immediately equip it, will inevitably somehow screw up my resistance cap. Almost never when I find an upgrade do my resistances come out of that process unscathed, and so what inevitably happens is I get a piece of gear that is a tangible upgrade to my character, but it sits in the bank until I find another piece of gear that then balances out whatever stat resistance changes happen from replacing that first piece of gear. And frankly, this could all pretty much immediately be solved if they just let us replace runes in our gear. If we could at least override them, that would be nice, and that would let you balance out your resistances far more often and far more frequently, and would also finally solve the issue of us having like way too many runes. I am swimming in runes right now. They keep dropping and there's no sync for them, and I'm not replacing gear often enough that I've got anywhere to put them, but that could be the case if I could just override runes. Even if you destroy the prior run in the process, if we could override runes in the sockets, that would be really, really nice. Class balance, pretty much as expected. This is all over the place. It's the initial iteration of the early access launch. We didn't expect this to be balanced across the board. After all, we only have half the classes, half the skill gems, and half the weapons in the game, but still it is worth pointing out there's a handful of classes and specs that are basically playing Path of Exile 1 with super fast screen clearing entire maps using a single skill, while other classes and specs are almost playing like Dark Souls. I'm looking at you, warriors. I'm so sorry. There's just a huge mismatch in clear times and general speed of gameplay between builds available for the various classes. Now, yes, a lot of this does just come down to the fact that there are only half the skills in the game and half the weapons. Well aware things will be dramatically changing. Class balance is going to be all over the place as they continue to add that additional content. But then there's also the question that I'd like to address of what are they aiming for in terms of gameplay pacing, because that is all over the place at the top end. As of right now, we are seeing just some insane damage and clear speeds that feel way out of line with what I thought that they were going for in Path of Exile 2. Now, I would love more pacing variety like what we had and what we experienced in the main campaign on our initial playthroughs. The whole game in the very pinnacle of endgame doesn't need to be that slow and deliberate. I don't expect that, but there's just like a massive gulf of a difference right now between how things felt when playing through the campaign and what mapping is looking like for like Ice Strike Invokers or Spark Storm Weavers or super high-end stat stacking Gemling Legionnaires. It's just crazy. Super high speeds, insta-gibbing everything on their map just like that, right? I mean, heck, even my Infernalist, which is a very popular build, it's super reliable, tanky, and steady clearing, but it just feels painfully slow when put next to and compared to those other aforementioned builds. So really, it's just a question of what does GGG want their end game to look like? Are they envisioning more what the campaign was, or is it supposed to be like a Vampire Survivors or PoE 1 endgame? Is their vision for builds like the fully maxed out stat stacking Tempest Flurry Gemling, is that what they're aiming for in terms of speed and clear times, or do they want it more in line with what Warriors are experiencing right now? We just don't know, and we'll have to see how things pan out as early access progresses and as they release balance patches, which are inevitably coming. Speaking of balance, stat balance is all over the place, especially when you look at defensive stats. It seems like armor in particular and life stacking are just way underperforming compared to evasion, but and more particularly, especially energy shield right now seems to be undisputed, far and away the best defensive stacking stat currently. I think the exception to that is some mana stacking that's taking place with various builds and stuff where you can have basically your mana replace your health pool. But other than that, energy shield stacking just universally seems to be the way to go right now, where health and armor and even to a lesser degree evasion just not being nearly as good. So again, one of these balance issues that we assume and hope that they are going to address. One shots, I mean, this is a problem. Now, having one shots in your game, that's okay. I think in particular, when you've got one shots in boss fights that are gated behind potentially hundreds of hours worth of grinding, and this is no exaggeration. To get to a Pinnacle boss fight requires you to find all of those citadels, and I am over 200 hours. I have still not found a single copper citadel. Over 200 hours, at least 90% of that time has been spent mapping. I haven't gotten all the pieces together to get to the Pinnacle boss. It's like ridiculous. It's crazy. The Citadel conversation is a whole nother can of worms, and maybe they're going to address and have us give us some better guidance to where the Citadels are located. But yeah, the one-shot mechanics, after spending potentially hundreds of hours grinding to get the pieces needed to even encounter that boss fight for the first time, if you're not looking it up on YouTube, you're probably going to die. Queue up another couple hundred hours of finding all your citadels and trying the boss fight again. Like, that just seems out of hand. I think in particular for stuff like this, they need to have some sort of onboarding to these encounters. Even if there's like a quest line that leads you up to the first time fighting that boss, and during that fight, when you're experiencing it for the first time, you can keep rerunning it. You get multiple attempts so that you can actually learn it from playing it rather than spend 100+ hours, get the materials together, do the boss fight. You get one shot to the mechanic that you didn't know about because it's your first time fighting the boss, and then you do those 100 hours again trying to get the stuff. Now, I know most people aren't actually grinding out those hundreds of hours trying to find all the citadels and put the pieces together themselves. In most cases, people are buying those keys to access the boss fights, but I can't even tell you, because I've been playing this game for a freaking month and I've still not even gotten all the pieces to freaking play the boss fights. So getting actually one shot by these Pinnacle bosses hasn't happened for me yet, but I'm not looking forward to it already from understanding how it all works. I mentioned on-death effects, and just the simple issue here is that all this really does is delay, besides like the frustration that comes from dying in this game for all the reasons we mentioned, losing 10% of your experience at that level, and then potentially losing any map mechanics if you were running a map. On-death effects just feel cheap, and really all they really do is delay picking up your loot. It feels like a very lame way to die. Now, I say this while acknowledging that might be the entire point. Like, GGG may specifically have these on-death effects that can one-shot players put in the game as a way to slow down mapping speed, because they know maybe that, you know, hey, we're going to have builds that get out of hand and they're going to be clearing maps very quickly. We want to put some roadblocks in there, and on-death effects is a way to do that. So maybe that's why they are so prevalent in this game. I don't know. If they intend to keep in all of the on-death effects that we're seeing right now, though, I think one thing that is clear is that they need to ramp up the visual clarity of some of these, because there have been many occasions where I've died to a on-death effect that one-shot me and I couldn't see what it came from. Absolutely no clue, because it was covered up by some ground debris or because it just wasn't clear enough. So if they're going to keep these, I think they need to be made clearer visually across the board. As for Magic Find, in general, I think Magic Find as a gear consideration in ARPGs is fine. Like choosing between getting better drops or getting better stats, and as such having faster clear speed, that's an interesting decision, right? But the fact is right now that with Magic Find affecting currency drops, it means that not stacking Magic Find seems to just put you at a severe disadvantage. Even if you're replacing potential Magic Find lines with lines that give you faster clear speed or better defenses so you die less often, that trade-off doesn't seem worth it. It's just so heavily weighted where Magic Find is like the no-brainer stat right now. It's just not very interesting. And now it does appear that there is some diminishing returns past a certain point. I have heard anywhere between 100 and 150 Magic Find is about where things start to really drop off. So you got people running around with like 300, 400% Magic Find. That seems to be excessive and unnecessary from some of the testing that I've seen. It's all still a work in progress, so who knows whether or not that's actually the case. Fact of the matter is right now Magic Find is ultra strong to the point where at least the community seems to agree you're really missing out if you're not stacking to at least 100% Magic Find. And I think when it's that clear cut that it should be reined in. Crafting and gear, I mean, it just seems right now, I know people talk about not wanting fully 100% deterministic crafting where you can pretty much guarantee getting the stats that you want on a gear, and not having that, I understand. You want some randomness that helps motivate the grind in these games. But right now, crafting essentially feels pointless. It feels just like 100% rolling the dice, 100% gambling. Now that I started actually about halfway through the month, I started actually engaging in trading, and it's so much better. Instead of wasting hundreds of exalts trying to roll for stuff that I never end up getting the distribution that I want, I just spend those exalts buying gear from other players, and it's just that much better. Except, of course, if you're SSF, if you don't want or don't like to trade, then you're just stuck with the current crafting system, which again, almost feels like 100% entirely gambling. And while we're on the topic of like crafting and gear, I want to add that uniques really feel in a strange spot currently. There's a handful of uniques that are just insanely good, build defining, super OP, and required for the top end builds. But a majority of them, like 90% of the uniques in the game, just seem bad. Now, maybe it's because we're early on, people are still figuring out the game, people haven't put together all the pieces, not all of the pieces are even in place. Again, we've got half the weapons, half the classes, half the skill gems, and so maybe some of these uniques really start to come online once all of that stuff gets added. I mean, hell, that's almost certainly the case. I've already found uniques where it just says coming soon. Like, that's literally it. There's like nothing, there are lines missing that just say, hey, this stuff's coming soon. So yeah, maybe the uniques, most of them feeling bad, won't be an issue once all of the stuff comes into the game. Again, something we'll have to see. Trading, I was really put off by this initially. I have gotten engaged with it, and I found it not as awful as I assumed it was going to be, although there is still some pretty clear pain points in there. Trading etiquette, dealing with other players, whispering 50 people for a ring and nobody gets back to you. This is especially true if you're first getting into trading and maybe you have like 1 divine and like 20 exalts. You're going to have a hard time getting anyone to respond to you at this point in the league, because it seems like if you're not trading for at least like 20 plus exalts or a full divine or above, a lot of people just aren't even responding, and so you're just kind of left stuck. You've got all these items in the market that people are listing but not even bothering to respond to your inquiries to purchase them. Obviously, them onboarding and having a in-game system, and as opposed to having to go out of game and access this website and go through all these filters and all of this, and then whispering and not hearing back from people, let alone the potential vulnerabilities that we're concerned about with all of this hacking that's going in place and people theorizing that it could be related to inviting these random people into your party and having them come to your hideout. All of that just adds fuel to this fire of people having an aversion to trading and how it's implemented in PoE 2. We've also got some big economy issues. One big thing that's affecting a lot of the player base right now is duping if you're involved in the trading league. Over the past couple of weeks, we've seen some reports of widespread duping bugs and exploits, with players taking some of the best items in the game and essentially printing limitless copies of them. This has resulted in things like the price of some of the most coveted items like Temporalis absolutely tanking recently, but also, as with any in-game economy, flooding the market with all this stuff messes it up. The market has been further bricked by a few things, like people rolling back server instances until they get perfect rolls on the gear that they want. There's this rarity bug apparently happening with Machination where people are getting up to 1,000% item rarity. And then that bug aside, as mentioned earlier, rarity on on gear affecting currency drops has resulted in what seems like a ton of inflation. Now, none of this is going to affect players who aren't in the trade league, who are going SSF, but for those of you who are in standard trade league, prices are just getting a tad out of hand. And if you're to the point where if you're not actively participating in trade, if you are not constantly selling the good gear that you get to get the currency to buy gear yourself, or if you're not running high rarity to get more currency and item drops from your mapping, you are very quickly getting priced out of the trading, where like you just can't afford anything, because anything even remotely close to an upgrade is like 5 to 10 plus divines, and there's just a lot of people who aren't running around with that kind of money. So one last thing I'd like to add to is, especially for our friends who are playing the game on console, not having a loot filter is abysmal if you're running Magic Find and you're doing things like breaches. Like your screen is full of garbage. So we need to figure out a way to get them some sort of a loot filter, even if it's one that GGG bakes into the game themselves. I don't know, but I'll wrap this all up by saying this game is exceptional. Easily one of my favorite titles and things that I've played in recent years. It's been quite a while since I've gotten this invested into a game. At this point, I suspect I'm actually still going to continue playing Path of Exile 2 throughout the course of the next year, especially when they release updates. We're assuming that we're going to get a few of these throughout the next 12 months with the multiple content updates that they're planning on, adding those new classes with the new weapons and skill gems, adding the additional acts, adding additional league mechanics, restarting the leagues. I've just been enjoying the game so much, it's pretty clear to me that I will be jumping back in from time to time throughout the course of the next year without a doubt. I've had a blast thus far. I am really looking forward to the first big update they come out with, and I plan to continue grinding away. Hopefully they address some of these issues we brought up here, but either way, I mean, hey, great job, GGG. It's been a while since I've been this thoroughly invested in a game for an extended period of time. Pretty clear they've got a winning formula on their hands, and we only have half the game. Can't wait to see where it goes. That's all for today. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time.